Welcome to the Creating Your Conditions podcast, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, the conditions we create, and the conditions we have yet to achieve. You can find us at Creating Your Conditions on Instagram and on YouTube. My name is Ben. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am your host. In today's episode, I am interviewing Alex Wyckoff. Alex is a former public policy consultant and policy advocate with 13 years experience working in elections and 8 years in nonprofits. He graduated from the University of Oregon in 2017 and received his master's in public policy from UC San Diego's School of Global Policy and Strategy in 2021. More recently, he has switched gears to become a fantasy author and has published 2 novels, with another 2 set to release this year. Alex focuses primarily on fantasy inspired by Asian mythology and seeks to blend themes and aesthetics uncommon to the genre. So I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Excited to get into this with you. You're probably the person I know the most. Like the most. What am I trying to say? Yeah, I know you the mostest. We're gonna go with that.
Yeah, you're gonna ask questions you've heard the answers to a lot.
And for those that don't know, Alex is also my partner. But I'm excited to get into it with you and share your life, and also, as we get into it, talk about your books and being an author. So thanks again for making time.
Yeah, of course. It'll be cool.
Okay, so I knew this was the question I was going to ask you as an intro question, but if you had to describe your life as a sandwich, what would be in it and why?
It's definitely a banh mi. Because I love banh mis.
I should have seen that coming.
Yeah, I feel like it's the most obvious answer. That or a meatball sub, but that doesn't fit my life as well. You've got everything in a banh mi. Like the exterior looks and feels all nice with that like Vietnamese style French bread, but then every now and again, right, you bite in and then boom, pepper or jalapeno, and if you're not ready for it, you're like, oh, this sandwich is spicier than I thought. But you've also got all that good filling. Like if you get one of those Chinese sausage and egg breakfast sandwiches, those are fire. Sometimes the eggs are a little dry. Sometimes it's great.
Okay, so why is this your life sandwich?
It's got a bit of everything. Moments of great peril, moments that are nice. There are, moments that feel like biting into those peppers, and you're like, ah! And there are moments that feel like that, tartar they put in some of those sandwiches. All rich and buttery.
Okay. But like a little acidic,
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. I should have known that was going to be your answer.
Yeah, well, it helps I get like a banh mi every week or 2.
Cool. Very cool. Thanks for humoring. Well, humoring as in answering that question, and humoring as in making me laugh with your answer. But very relatable. Definitely want to get a banh mi now. So I want to ask you, where did you grow up, and so like where are you from?
That's such a hard question to answer. I've kind of got it tailored down from answering this question at like a million parties and social events. Long story short, yeah, right? When you've traveled a bunch and lived in a couple places, it gets complicated. Like, okay, I was born in Paris, France. Didn't stay there for very long, though. In a couple years, we had moved to San Francisco, which is where I would credit at least the early part of my childhood. Pretty close to what is now the De Young Museum, though that did not exist until the last couple years I was there. That's vaguely near Golden Gate Park, like maybe a 20-30 minute bike ride from Golden Gate Park. And then when I was, I want to say, about to turn 12, is when we moved to Los Angeles, but more specifically, Manhattan Beach, which is like this little beachy town in what's called South Bay. And I spent the remainder of my childhood there till I was 18. Though I guess at the end of that, I did live briefly in a martial arts dojo in North Hollywood for a bit. That was right before I went off to college in Oregon.
Gotcha. So, what prompted your parents to live in France, and then what prompted them to move to San Francisco?
Uh, Business both times, I think. I actually have never asked my mom what business it was, but it was me, my sister, and my parents. We were living in France at the time, and we had been there, well, they had been there for a handful of years already because of my dad's work. And then a little bit after I was born, he got a new job with a new company that took us to San Francisco.
Okay. So, you have an older sibling, at least one older sibling. Do you have other
Three in
siblings?
total.
Okay. Got you, got you. The other two siblings?
The oldest out of the four kids, they are twins.
Nice. What's the age gap between you and all your siblings?
10 years with my sister, 20 years with my brothers.
Okay. Um, are your brothers, were they in France with you too then?
No. By then, let me see. By the time I was born, even, right, they were both 20.
20 already.
So,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, you had the one who was in college at UCLA, that was William. And then you've got the other, Dennis, who was in the Marine Corps at the time. And I believe that year he was training. No, no, he was stationed already. He was in Okinawa. That's where he was stationed.
Okay. Actually, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but where was your sister born?
In Berkeley, California.
Okay. Got it. And where were your brothers born?
They were both born in Cambodia.
Okay. A lot of transnational pieces here to tie you back. Um, just trying to paint the picture, you know?
Yeah, all different backgrounds, right? Like there's France, obviously, Western European country. There's Northern California, which is the colder California that nobody thinks about when they think of California. And then there's Cambodia, which was really, really sketch at the time, predominantly because of wars and imperialistic conflicts.
Hmm. Hmm. And your parents' ethnic backgrounds?
My mom is Chinese, though a lot of the family members on her side would refer to themselves as Cambodian. You know, they speak Khmer, a lot of them, but it's not in our blood. At least most of us. That's just that because they were living there.
More of like because they grew up there. It was like an ethnic like diaspora.
Yeah, I mean they also hopped around quite a bit. Like they were in China, and then briefly in France, and then in Cambodia for a few years. So that's pretty crazy in itself. And as for my dad, he was, I guess, more American than anything else. A lot of white Americans, right? They have that thing where they'll say their blood harkens from somewhere, but they'll have no connection to where they were from. So really, it's just American.
Hmm. Yeah. The privilege of stability, I think.
Multiple generations of it, at least.
Yeah. 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 Um, Thanks for answering all those questions about your family. I'll get back to you, I promise. I do wonder, like, did you always know this much about your family's background growing up, or was it something that you were allowed to ask questions about as you got a little bit older?
Well, my mom always told me all about my dad's background. Especially after he passed away when I was 10, the stories became more frequent. She wanted me to stay connected with his memory. So I learned all about his stuff. Also, I would visit my grandparents on his side over in Connecticut pretty frequently when I was a kid, less so later on. And then when I was, I think, 16 is around the time both of them had passed away. So then visits to Connecticut stopped. But yeah, she told me a lot about that. As for her side, that was a little bit more of a battle. She always talked about Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge, even when I was a kid, but really finagling
Wait,
the
hold on.
details.
Wait, so she would tell you about the violence she experienced when you were a child still?
Yes,
That's heavy.
it is. So I got ingrained with a deep understanding of that, and the struggle they'd all been through. Like, I have an uncle, right? He's got basically a numerical tattoo. It looks very similar to what you would see, say, Jews in concentration camps were labeled as. The same style was often used for child soldiers inducted at that time.
Hmm. So your uncle was a child soldier, right?
Yeah, at least one. There might have been more, but I admit I've never delved quite that deep. It's a painful thing to ask people about.
Yeah, yeah. When you lose so many of your family members that way, and not even at a war fighting age, as literal children of war.
Yeah, and they all carry some degree of trauma, whether or not they were fighting, because obviously you have the
Yeah.
killing fields, those like very destitute camps. You've got those pits just piled with corpses, hence killing fields. So they've all seen that level of brutality.
Mm, it's pretty heavy stuff.
It is, it is.
Yeah. I don't know if you had. I don't know if I had asked you like if when your mom started sharing these stories, but it feels like pretty heavy to be told as a child. You know.
I never registered it that way when I was a kid. I don't think I
Of
had
course.
the yeah, I don't think I had the frame of mind to really get how heavy it was. But yeah, looking back, it is pretty heavy to tell a child. I would say the first time I heard stories about it, I was maybe 8, somewhere around the 3rd grade.
Yeah. And you have a really good memory, so I'm sure it stuck with you, and obviously you still remember it. But yeah, thank you for. I know I didn't mean to dive into that so much. I was just curious, and it gives context of like the complications of diaspora and immigration and the reasons people have to leave certain areas of the world, their homes, their countries of origin, you know. And even if you didn't experience those things, they are like in your genetic code, right? Because survival skills and that kind of stuff is like passed down through like your DNA as well as the stories that you inherit.
Yeah, there's a lot of it in my family. Like on my dad's side, he was adopted when he was a baby, and over the years, I have gotten to know his biological parents as well, and they have a crazy, crazy story where my great grandfather Arthur on that side, he was from Latvia, and their family, he and my grandfather and my grandfather's siblings, all fled from Latvia as the USSR was consolidating power, and he ended up working in Paris. Funny enough, but what's really crazy about that,
Oh,
right, is
whoa.
yeah, right after he fled the USSR, he's in France, right, and then they got invaded by the Nazis, and they had to flee again. So, not fleeing twice in a lifetime, in an adult lifetime, that is some really crazy stuff.
And this is, your like biological great grandparents, right?
Yeah.
Wow. I've just never thought about like those both sides of you put together, Like I know kind of like pieces of both stories, but when you think of it in like that ancestral lens of you are literally encoded with this stuff, right? Because it is passed to you. It's kind of wild to think about.
Yeah, all the little coincidences and big life events that had to come together just for me to be born, for example. Like, if even a little of that had gone differently, let's say the Nazis invade a year earlier or a year later, I probably wouldn't exist.
Hmm. Or if your mom had been a target, I mean, she was a target, but like if she had been effectively targeted, right?
Yeah, or even something smaller. Like, what if her paperwork had come in a little later or a little earlier? Then that completely changes the trajectory of her life in the US.
Hmm. Yeah, immigration's pretty wild, huh?
Yeah, the way people move about and like seeing it not just in my family but across history, it's really, I mean, it's cool to think about. It's also a little sad. I've been really deep diving right into Viking history for a little bit, and that's just so cool
Yes,
to
you
see,
have.
right? Yeah. How they like, they established their settlements in England somewhere around the 8th, 9th century. And then by like the 10th or 11th century, you see a Viking king of England in the form of King Canute, and how that completely changed the power between the Saxons, the English Saxons, and the Normans. It's fascinating. I won't go too crazy on that, though.
I was just thinking about how long you were gonna ramble for about a deep dive that you do because I'm used to these from Alex. He'll like start telling me about a subject that really is not connected to anything in the present moment, but he's like, but they used to do this and they had all of these kinds of tools. And now I have an archive in my memory of all these tools because I needed to read it for a book. Like he needed to
Yeah,
conduct the
basically.
research to be able to write about a thing. Um, it's so cute.
Just wait till I start talking about all the hat research I did for
I
Dragonslayer.
knew you were gonna bring that up. I was gonna ask about the hats. I'm not gonna ask about the hats. We'll try to go back to your timeline, but it is. I think it's really. I think it's really empowering that you know so much about your family's history. As painful as it is, there are clear patterns that you can see, and I hope that you also give yourself grace as you go through hard things because your ancestors also went through hard things and they might not have had the chance to heal. So when people talk about being like healers in their family and cycle breakers, it's also that you have to kind of process what they went through without them there. Even though you didn't go through it, but like it's in your code to also feel and be in tune with it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it takes generations to heal from some of that stuff. It really does. I also benefit, right, from the efforts of other people. Like, the reason on my mom's side we're able to trace our history so well is I've got my Uncle David. He took it upon himself to keep a record of all of it. He's got photo albums for days. And he's sat me down more than once, gone through them. We've talked about it.
that's
Uh,
awesome. A family historian.
Yeah, I should probably take that up myself, honestly, when he gets a little older. But for now, he's still doing it. And then on my dad's side, he did something really cool, where to reconnect with his background, he, upon meeting his adoptive parents, he figured out where his grandfather, my great grandfather, Arthur, was living, went to visit him, took me with him. I was a child of like maybe 3 or 4 at the time, and he sat him down for this multi-hour long interview where he asked him all these questions, and all that's still recorded now on VHS and also digital now. I finally got them to digitize it a few years ago.
Nice, nice. Um, yeah, I think that's a really great practice, at least to get the life stories of your family members. Um, there's complications within having a relationship with your family, but I think there is a lot of value in knowing your family history.
Yeah, it's important to know where you came from. It helps give you context for yourself.
Yeah. Um, let's go back to you a little bit. I guess you more recently in history than you is also your family, but so you moved to San Francisco, and so what was it like growing up there until you moved to LA?
Well, I think my experience was really different than most people who grew up in San Francisco. We were definitely in a wealthier area, the Richmond area. I mean, I guess it's obvious, right, that it would be higher income to live near Golden Gate Park. But also, it was that I was enmeshed in a French community when I was there and went to a French school in elementary school. So that was really interesting, right? Like learning two languages simultaneously, English and French, and really not having that much connection with other American kids. I mean, yeah, I guess they were also American going to the school with me, but everybody spoke French. Most of the people there were born in France or had been going to French schools since the beginning. So I couldn't speak to the average experience of someone growing up in San Francisco.
Right, but it's yours, like, right outside of the French school. um did you only hang out with all of those French students? And how long were you in that school for?
Yeah, I did only really hang out with other Franco Americans, and that's the term for it.
Isn't that French Americans?
No, I don't know. I guess French Americans works too. And I was at that school. I went to three different ones actually in my time there. First, there was a like French preschool in what's called EB, East Bay. It's across the Bay Bridge. Hell of a drive to get there. And eventually, somewhere around like first grade, I ended up in Lycée Français de la Pérouse on Haight and Ashbury, much closer, even walking distance technically. Um, and today it's called Lycée Français de San Francisco. I don't know why they changed the name. And then in my last year of French school, I actually spent a year at the French American International School. I forget what street that was on, but it's the one that's connected to and part of the same like company as the Chinese American International School. I don't know if they're still parallel to each other across the street, but that's how it was when I was there.
Okay. um it's so funny, right? Because like to you this was normal, but I guess when did you realize it was not normal and that you started feeling different from other kids?
I remember the moment. Sixth grade, my first day of sixth grade. I went into second period, which was a music class. And the teacher comes up and introduces herself. And then all the students got the announcement, and everyone stood up and started giving the American Pledge of Allegiance. I had never done that before in French school. And I was looking around like, what? What is everyone doing? Am I supposed to do this? Uh,
What are the words?
no, genuinely, I didn't know the words
Yeah,
yet.
yeah. Interesting. And why did you move from an area like, so you had to move out of that neighborhood, like you moved from San Francisco to LA in that year, right?
Yeah, yeah. We moved the summer right before I started sixth grade.
Okay. um do you mind sharing why you had to move?
No, I don't really mind. My mom really wanted a fresh start. Just a year earlier, my dad and my sister had been killed in a car accident, and that put a lot of strain on her. Now a single mother, and she just wanted something different. She had met my stepfather a few months earlier. Things moved quite quickly, and they decided to get a fresh start together in Los Angeles and Manhattan Beach. And so, yeah, they moved.
Hmm. And you didn't mention this, but you and your mom were in the car. Just so like other folks have that context too, since it was pretty significant, if not like probably the most significant event of your childhood.
Yeah, I was in the back seat, and she was in the passenger seat.
Yeah. Um, what was the those first few years after the accident and when you moved to LA like?
Pretty crazy jumble of emotions. They talk about the 5 stages of grief. I think, as far as psychology goes, that one's pretty spot on. I didn't really go through the denial part for very long, like less than a couple hours. The reality of it really set in from the moment she told me that they didn't make it. Um, and there was a lot of anger for quite a long time, quite a few years, and sadness. I got those at the same time.
What were
Anger.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
what were
was
you
gonna
saying?
ask what were you I was gonna ask what you were angry about.
Angry at a lot of things. Angry at God. My family believed in Jesus a decent amount. Most of them are still practicing Christians. And so that seemed very unfair to me as a child. I even brought it up at the speech I gave at my dad's funeral, that I was angry at God. I was angry at the government too, because the guy who caused the crash, right? He was this military fry cook, and he was off base, driving on the wrong side of the road at 100 miles or so per hour in the rain, high off his mind, off of drugs, and that was why he crashed into us. And when it came time for depositions, when we sued for wrongful death, I was brought in for one of those, and he had government appointed lawyers, and one of
Because
them.
they were protecting the government and the military, not just him as an individual, right? Because he represents all of them. So of course they're gonna bring all of like these layers of protection for him.
Yeah, and that felt strange. I had never really thought about the government too much until then, but definitely seeing them defend him and try to get him
Mm.
off a little lighter, that stuck with me.
And you were 10.
I was 13 for the deposition I attended.
Got it. Because it was a couple years after the accident.
Yeah, the lawsuit overall took several years. I think I was 15 when it finally wrapped up.
Got it. Got it. You mentioned that you went through your phases of anger, and I understand that. And what was like, I guess, the waves of sadness then, and maybe even now, still.
Back then, it was a lot, right? Like, there would be immediately after, still in San Francisco, there would be coming home from school and the house feeling so much emptier than it used to. And
Mm.
that year, later in the year, there were kids who picked on me about it, about being the only child who had lost a parent. They didn't know what they were doing, right? They were kids. It's still a cruel thing to do, but that really got to me then. Um,
I see that depicted in movies and shows a lot, and I don't understand why. Like, why is there not empathy for that? Like, you lost your family members, not just you don't have a dad. You know what I mean? Like, it's so odd to me.
I think children can be very cruel before you learn the life lessons that make you more mature. they don't even understand the thing they're saying. They have no ability to grasp those emotions.
Hmm. It's very kind of you.
Maybe I did just throw all children under the bus there.
Oh man. And what is it? Did you want to share more about how that felt when you were younger versus now?
Well, I guess now, I'm 29 now, so I've had 19 years to process this. There's a lot I'm still processing. I really struggle with vehicles. It's really easy for like loud sounds to trigger me. Like if someone is too loud in my passenger seat, or if people start arguing with each other when I'm driving. That one really gets to me. And
Mm.
every time I drive, right, I kind of revisit it. I kind of see it, and it makes me a little lightheaded sometimes when I'm like on these ungodly LA freeways, 6 lanes plus. Everyone's changing lanes, a bunch of them without signaling. So I still have a long way to go with it, I think.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It happened when you were young, so it's been a long time, but you were old enough to be able to put it into memory, right? So it's obviously incredibly impactful. And also, just like when Alex and I lived in Chicago for 2 years, that was like the least I'd ever drive anywhere that I've ever lived since I started driving. And now that we moved back to LA, I realize I don't like driving. I've just needed to drive, but I get tired. I get like sleepy as soon as I get on a freeway because of like the motion of it. People not turning their blinkers on in LA is like so frustrating. And people do zigzag a lot instead of just staying in a lane and staying put in the direction that they need to go. Um, it's a really inconvenient way to like transport people. At least driving as an individual versus like being on public transit. So I get that. And I feel pretty like confident as a driver. I feel pretty calm as a driver. But having lived somewhere where I didn't need to do it, I am now just like, why would I live somewhere where I need to drive all the time? This is dumb. Like this is not how I want to spend my time. Like don't even get me started on the money you have to spend on cars. But yeah,
I could go on forever about what I hate about driving.
yeah. But yeah, I understand and I appreciate you sharing about that, really impactful accident in your life. And I know it continues to have a presence in the way that you navigate the world. Um, and I think, to honor like your dad and your sister, it also means that you are a level of close and an admiration of both of them to feel this grief, right? Because if you didn't have a connection with them, it would be different for you too.
Yeah, we were all very close. I was definitely the closest with my sister out of all my siblings. Closest in age, of course, helps with that. And I grew up seeing her a lot more. And with my dad, we spent a lot of time together. On Sundays in San Francisco, they'd close off Golden Gate Park to traffic. We'd bike together every single Sunday. And uh, when I was growing up at night, right, instead of like him
Wait, wait,
reading to
wait,
me,
and you would, yes, I want to get to that. And he would get you ice cream every time you went on a bike ride, right?
snow cones specifically.
Snow cones. I'm sorry, shaved ice, shaved ice.
That's where my love of shaved ice comes from. Now that
Even
I
though
think
we
about
never
it,
get any,
I was just thinking it's been a while.
I don't think I've ever gotten shaved ice with you.
There aren't that many places that have it, unless you go to like Tea Station where they fill it with all this other stuff that I don't really want.
So you want like an unadulterated shaved ice snow cone?
I just want the ice and the sugar syrup.
Okay, okay. I want a little fruit, you know.
No, no fruit.
Oh man, I'll eat
Synthetic
it
as it
for you.
gets.
Okay. And then You were talking about stories with your dad.
Yeah, at some point earlier than I have a memory for. I don't even remember the transition, but we stopped having reading time, and instead we would lay there, and he and I would come up with stories together. We would make them up out of our imaginations.
Oh. Alex does that with me sometimes, and he owes me a continuation of a story, just for the record.
Yeah, the one I've been telling Vin is a new, modernized version of the very first one my dad and I came up with, Dinosaur and Polar Bear. And it's about like this
The polar
brontosaur.
bear, the polar bear is like its images are getting sold on like a product, and it's like, whoa, that's me. You can't be doing that. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's the
then
modern one. Yeah, obviously I didn't know about lawsuits when I was a kid, so that was not a plot line back then. The premise is just this like polar bear and this brontosaurus dinosaur. The brontosaurus for some reason is anthropomorphic, like vaguely human in physical shape, except for the neck, I guess. And they live together in this apartment in New York City.
wait, is this about your dad and one of his friends when he lived in New York City?
I don't think so, because I mean, maybe he took inspiration from that. Now that I think about it, he never mentioned anything like that to me.
Oh, I mean, he didn't have to place it in New York City, but I know he lived there, right? So like, maybe he had a best friend that he was roommates with. That is the foundation of the framework of the story, at least.
Yeah, maybe. I couldn't tell you.
That's funny. Um, but it's cool that he encouraged storytelling for you. Um, I want to get us, I guess, a little bit to more to the present, but I want to ask you about what forms did storytelling take place in your young adulthood? So, in your high school, teen years, because I want us to, like I want to share that you're a writer now, and you're on your probably by the time this is released, you will have published your second book, and you can
Yeah, that's
find
out
it in the
tomorrow.
yeah, you can find it in the description of this video. So I want to know about, yeah, like storytelling and how that got normalized for you. What form did that take? Like, was it writing, forums, what have you?
Yeah, so I was really into anime when I was a kid, and I'm still super into anime. And I really don't know where the inspiration to Google this came from, nor do I know where I learned the word roleplay. But I was really into the anime Bleach, and I Googled Bleach roleplay forum, and I found this one called Bleach Online World. I'm still friends with a lot of people from it today, and it was just this website where you would make an original character set in the Bleach universe. It was an alternate universe, so we got rid of all the canon characters and replaced them with our own. And I, yeah, wrote my character in this little character sheet they had. Actually, it was a very long character sheet. I just want to note that it took forever. It took me like 2 days to write the app, and then we would like take turns posting the actions of our characters in these long, sweeping posts that were in literary prose.
Nice. Why do you think you gravitated towards anime and those kinds of stories?
I think they were dramatic and fun. My first exposure to anime was Yu-Gi-Oh! Growing up. I didn't realize it was anime at the time, but then right after Yu-Gi-Oh, in my Saturday morning cartoons, they would play Shaman King, another anime. That story is awesome, and that really inspired me. And then later, I found yet another anime. I was staying with my brother for a little bit. I want to say in Monrovia is where he was living at the time. And on Adult Swim, they were airing Naruto. And so I got into Naruto in the middle of what's called the Chunin exam arc, which is like the third or fourth arc of the series. And I had access to the internet, so I was like, okay, let me start this from the beginning. I Googled Naruto episodes because streaming was way easier back in the day. Had all these free anime sites, and I watched Naruto from episode 1 and kept going. Eventually, I got into Bleach as well through that. And these are, back then, they had much longer series than they do today. We're talking hundreds of episodes. Like Naruto by itself is what, 722 episodes, I think. And Bleach is of similar length. Bleach is actually still ongoing, funny enough. And
Wild.
right, to be fair, that's because they took a many-year hiatus. But even so, these were such long series with only weekly 20-minute episodes that even getting into them at like age 12, Naruto and Bleach, I was watching them all the way until I was in college, which is when they ended.
Okay. Which anime do you think was most meaningful for you in that time?
Probably Naruto. Like Bleach was the fun one to roleplay because that anime succeeds entirely off of rule of cool and great fight animation, but Naruto has a depth to
What
its story.
what is rule of cool?
As long as it's really cool, the plot doesn't matter.
Wow. Okay, so that leaves a lot of creative space to do whatever you want when you're playing.
Yeah, the holes in the world building allowed our site to like really get creative, and some of my greatest creative moments, even today, came out of that.
So cute. Such a cute little nerd.
Yeah, well, if only I'd been born a little later and gotten in when anime was mainstream with the kids.
I know. I know. Different times, different times. Did you Oh wait. You talked about Naruto and because of the depth of the story?
Yeah, like there's this kid Naruto. He's 12 when the story begins, and when he was a baby, his parents died fighting the nine-tailed fox, the Kyubi no Yoku,
Spoilers.
which that's literally the opening scroll of the series.
Yeah.
The only way that spoilers you is if you have never watched Naruto. And yeah, so they died against the nine-tailed fox, but the nine-tailed fox was not killed. It was sealed inside of him. And so he grows up with no parents and being shunned by the village. But even so, he's this like super happy-go-lucky dude who feels intense loneliness, and his goal is to become the leader of the village, the Hokage. And so the story goes through his journey to get there. And there are a lot of hard moments. There are characters who react very understandably but very poorly to the war-torn world they live in, these great ninja wars. And Naruto has to fight in these wars when he's a little older. And so you see all these different people's solutions and reactions to the strife that they go through. And there's just so much depth to all those characters. And that's just, it's so captivating.
Why do you think that resonated with you so much?
I guess it's a mix of things. There was all that dramatic music they would play that really punctuated the scenes. The animation and the fighting were really cool. The magic system was insanely cool. One of the best I've ever seen to this day. And also every character, right, had this immeasurable depth to them that you don't often see in anime today. Like, you've got Naruto, who believes that his ninja way is to create understanding and peace between people. But then late in the series, he meets his counterpart, who was also a student under his same teacher. His counterpart is named Nagato. And Nagato has gone the complete opposite route. He's trying to create weapons of mass destruction to force peace into the world by making everyone fear him. And it was just interesting to see that dichotomy. And then you got all sorts of other characters with all sorts of other motivations and goals.
Okay. Anime deep dive complete. I know that's still like a very shallow dive, but
Well, Naruto again is over 700 episodes, so there's no way you can do that in a podcast episode.
no, it's like one per episode.
Yeah, basically.
Um, cool. I uh, I loved hearing you talk about it because of the attention to the world, all parts of it. You know, like you talked about like the magic systems and the way that music sets the scene and the way that action fights, as well as like the story, like the depth of the story, like make the whole series a whole like the thing. It's not just like really good editing and like really cool animation. Because obviously, in the early pieces of in the early years of Naruto, like the animation is not that great, and then it gets better. But the story was good right from the beginning, you know.
Yeah, and even in the beginning, you see these clashes of ideology, even for the kids. Like, there's another guy, another character, Gara, that Naruto meets fairly early in the series, and Gara has had the same exact childhood. Dead parents, a tailed beast like the Nine Tails sealed inside of him. But unlike Naruto, who has started to make friends and has always been this kind of cheerful dude, Gara is this edgy, very dark character who believes his destiny in life is to just murder people.
Hmm. I feel like that's a really good description of the spectrum of grief and also just life. You know, the way that you can turn out from similar conditions in life.
Yeah, it shows how little differences can shape people. Like, what saved Naruto was he did have some support as a kid, right? He's got his teacher from school, Iruka, who takes him out to ramen. And later in life, at the start of the series, he gets his sensei, Kakashi, and later his master, the pervy sage. And then, yeah, the pervy sage. We all love the pervy sage.
Okay.
And by contrast, you've got Gara, who's like his uncle, his only real parental figure left alive, eventually tries to kill him and tells him no one has ever loved him. And that happens when he's like 7. And his father is the Kazekage, the leader of the Sand Village. And he's this like cruel, kind of fascist dude who just sees Gara as a weapon. So Gara never gets this support and never moves past his anger. At least he's never moved past it when you first meet him.
Hmm. I feel like you could do a podcast about just anime.
Probably. If it's a good anime, I've probably seen it, at least if it's a shonen.
What's a shonen?
It's battle action manga.
Okay. Okay. Let's go back to you a little bit. Um, this is already the second time we got derailed. Not a bad derail. It's just derailed into a deep dive about something you know a lot about.
Well, I feel like that context is like big for where I'm at now.
Yeah, I know. It's cool. I love it. I love that. What was high school like for you?
Oh man, high school was ass. Uh, I was still reeling from the trauma, and it just felt so hard to fit in with other kids. It was this like pretty wealthy high school, Miracosta. Like I had one kid in my class whose father was an executive at Boeing, another who was the heir to like the Skechers family, and that's just crazy. These kids who come from so much, and they're lives, not just in the material sense, are so rich with different things. Whereas here I am, like, I've just come off this great trauma and losing a parent and a sibling, and everyone just seemed so. Uh, I guess they didn't really have concept of things like that. Most of them, and
Privileged into like the highest level you could possibly imagine, right?
yeah, and so their biggest concerns were not my biggest concerns, and it made it very hard to feel like I fit in, even when I made friends. And I became very closed off about my past and the feelings I experienced, and I didn't share them with anybody really. And also, there was the shallow, more petty part where being a short guy in high school, that was kind of rough. There'd be people who picked on me until I learned how to fight, anyways. And then dating was pretty difficult there too. Also, not just because of height, but awkwardness. And there was a racial component too. Like, I had a girl tell me she would never date an Asian guy, and all these different factors coming together to make me feel really alien in that environment.
Hmm. Did trying to find my thought.
That's
I know, it's just like my brain is turning off.
I see that Play-Doh.
I know, squishy.
Don't eat it.
You ate it.
Yep.
You're a Play-Doh eater now too.
Ugh, I'm a degenerate like you.
Yeah, degenerates together. God damn it. Um, but on your high school experience, it's pretty wild. Just like the things that you just mentioned that these people come from, like the vast, the tremendous wealth that they come from. Um,
Yeah.
it's kind of unimaginable that your classmates are heirs to a brand like Skechers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really baffling to think about. And like, that same air, right? Like when he was 21, he was going on business trips to Thailand. Like that's some crazy stuff. But on the other hand, to be fair here, there were less seen people in my high school too who had similar experiences. I've recently reconnected with a friend from high school. She still lives in LA, doesn't live too far from where I'm at now, here in Torrance. And recently, I had the opportunity to ask her more about what high school was like for her. And she grew up with like she grew up without her parents. Her aunt and grandma mostly raised her, and both were working class. She had to get a special allowance to attend our school district. She didn't have any money really, so she was nothing like the typical Miracosta kid. And she would get racist comments from teachers. She would have counselors tell her they didn't think that she could make it in our school. And I have to admit, hearing that from her kind of healed a little part of me too, knowing
Because
that she
you
went
weren't
through
alone.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to talk about those things to another student when you're already either getting made fun of or being singled out for those pieces of you, which it sounds like both of you were going through in your own ways.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny, both of us found escape in anime. That may be one reason I turned to it so hard,
Yeah,
was the escapism of it. And like today, she is a professional cosplayer, which is very cool.
nice. It's
Still
amazing.
watches anime. Yeah.
It's cool. I love that. It's interesting how reconnecting with someone can have an impact on healing your past self.
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting. Though I admit I kick myself a little thinking, oh man, I should have tried to be better friends with her in high school. Like, we were actually pretty close for a bit in high school, but I never understood the background she came from back then. So,
Yeah.
I didn't make the effort I should have had I known.
Yeah, but you were going through your own things, and she was too. Your environment also told you both that what you look like and who you are is like not okay. So why would you feel safe even reaching out to another student?
Yeah, and it's only strengthened my view on what high school was like. Hearing her story, like hearing how
Yeah.
hard it was, even the socioeconomic thing aside, like hearing what it was like for her to be a black girl in one of like maybe 7 black girls in our year, if
Mm.
that, in a school that was predominantly white.
Yeah. No, that's wild. It's wild stuff. Um
Uh, I
hmm. Um so moving from high school to like the next phase of your life, was it oh, also, did you do any sports in high school?
Yeah, I started doing jujitsu when I was in high school. That was how I learned to fight. It was actually how I got bullies to lay off me. Um, my good friend Nicola loves to make fun of me for this. That I beat up multiple of my former bullies to get them to stop. He calls me very violent. Uh, he'll never let it go. I shouldn't have told him that.
Yeah, but he just does that to tease you, not because he means it, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's all
I
in
was
good
like,
fun.
I was like, I don't know if he understands what bullying means.
I'll be like, all right, Nicola, you better watch yourself or you're next. I
Come
would never
at.
do that to him.
No, you wouldn't. He's too lanky. I love the man, but
It would be weird to fight a guy like that. Yeah, with those super long limbs.
yeah, but I feel like you do it pretty quick too.
Well, long limbs are super vulnerable to jujitsu, especially.
Hmm. And then, did you do any other sports, or were you in any other extracurriculars in high school?
The big extracurricular in high school was journalism.
Hmm. More writing, huh?
Yeah, that was really useful. It taught me a lot of discipline skills. The way my editors sat on me was very useful for helping me figure my shit out. And also, I was on the news section, so everything had to be completely objective. I learned how to write very factually and how to do stuff in few words. Like, I'd only ever get 500 words for an article, for example, unless it was a bigger feature piece.
Hmm.
And my particular beats, beat spelled Bete for some reason, don't ask me why. Um, my
That's how
particular
that's
beats,
spelled. It's
yeah,
Bete. I thought it was Beat. What?
so did I. Apparently it's Bete. That's what my journalism
Yours?
teacher told me. I don't know.
Okay.
Uh, but my beats, my subjects I covered a
Hmm.
different subject each year I was there. I had 2 major subjects, sophomore year and junior year. That was because in my senior year, I continued the subject I was in previously, and also I was helping as like kind of a pseudo editor for newer people who had come in. We split the class into 2 periods in my senior year instead of one, so I was like the only person of experience in the third period class, and the fourth period was the main one. But I did police and crime my first year on the paper, and that was fascinating. And I did school administration my second and third year. And
Drama.
yeah, that was drama because the teachers' union and the district were in the middle of negotiations when I started doing that.
Hmm. All right. Spicy stuff.
Oh yeah, you should have heard some of the rants the teachers would go on in interviews.
About what?
The way the district would like kind of screw them. They would offer pay raises that were too low. And keep in mind, these teachers, a lot of them are commuting from outside this wealthy area. Like they can barely afford rent as is. And at the same time as like giving the teachers bad deals. The school was showing they clearly had the money, because it was in my senior year that they unveiled the iPad program, where every kid got an iPad. And, well, my year did not get iPads, to be fair here, but every year below us did. And that's crazy, right? And they're giving all these students iPads that they really don't need, and the iPads saw in the next few years a drop in people's overall scores and grades. And so obviously they had the money, right, to pay these teachers, but they just didn't. And that baffled me as a teenager. I was like, these are the people I'm seeing every single day who are, teaching me shit. Like, pay them.
You little policy advocate, you.
Well, yeah, like, I understand that a lot of the admin just wanted to line their pockets, and some of them maybe wanted to run for small elected positions one day, but come on. The teachers are doing most of the work here.
Yeah. And also, given the average wealth of most of your high school, those children don't need iPads to pay attention.
No, I find it would probably have been better not to have them, because, like, my class never got iPads. We had one of the highest API scores in our school's history. Our record was not broken until the following, maybe 2-3 years later. And, like, we were just paying attention to PowerPoint presentations from a projector. Whereas, later years, you've got these kids diddling around on their iPads through class. And in my year, at least, they were confiscating phones if you were doing that. And they couldn't do that to the iPads because they were being used as instructional tools. So kids had no ability, or I guess there was no reason for the iPads to be taken, nothing that could stop them, no incentive from not just dicking around.
Yeah, that tracks. All right, so here's you, 18 years old, journalism and a bit of martial arts fighting under your belt, and growing up in this very wealthy high school and neighborhood for your teen years. What was next for you?
College.
So, where did you go? Why'd you go there?
University of Oregon. And I picked it because one night when I was sleeping in the middle of senior year, when app season was in full swing, this must have been October of senior year, I suddenly woke up in like a cold sweat. And I'm serious. Like, I woke up in a cold sweat, freaking out, thinking, oh my God, I've mostly applied to California schools. I hate it here. I don't want to stay here. And
why didn't you want to stay in California? Why did you hate it here?
Bad experiences, bad high school experience, and a lot of my peers were very vapid, frankly. And a lot of the adults that I met were very vapid. There's just this culture in Los Angeles that I really am not a fan of. And I had to get out. I needed something new, something different. I needed to get out of the bubble. So at like 2 a.m, right, I hopped on the computer and worked through the night on an application to University of Oregon. It was the first out-of-state school that I applied to. I got the acceptance letter like 3 weeks later, and in that moment I was like, that's it. Unless I get into I don't know, UC Berkeley, or actually no, I didn't apply to Berkeley. Unless I get into I don't know, Yale or something, I'm going to this school, no matter what.
Okay. So what was it like going to school in U of O?
It was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, straight up. So I showed up, 18 years old, and I'd been living in my dojo, so I was super ripped, and that did great for my social life. But on top of that, I met people who were of like mind almost immediately. These guys who were in that weird in-between space of jocks and nerds, where they loved playing sports, loved going to the gym, we'd watch sports together, But we'd also watch anime, and we'd talk about nerdy stuff like Star Wars. And me and my dorm guys, we eventually made a tradition where uh, every new like movie we wanted to go see together, usually Fast and Furious or similar movies, we would go to Texas Roadhouse, get a big steak dinner, then go see the movie. And that was just wonderful. It was like I found community and started to really find myself for the first time. And I got involved with a lot of like Asian students, many of them international students. I started attending their parties, refinding the Asian part of my soul in a way I hadn't in high school, where everyone was white and there was
And
school
racist.
spirit. Yeah, and there was a lot of racism there. To be fair, there was a lot of racism in my college too. You know, the university was very liberal, but the neo-Nazi presence in Lane County is massive, and I saw plenty of like Nazi marches when I was there. But you know, Nazis aside, I had a great experience.
Nazis is
Yeah, you got to say that oftentimes these days, I think.
Nazis
Nazis
aside.
aside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The gym was gorgeous. It was the greatest gym I have ever had the privilege of going to. That means a lot. Like, it really upped my fitness game, so I was feeling so good every single day. And I was finding that somehow classes were really easy for me. I guess the second I started paying attention and feeling motivated, everything became easy. And I was doing all sorts of stuff, all these extracurriculars. I really felt like that was the first step for me finding who I needed to be. So college was really, really great.
And who do you think you needed to be at that time?
I think for one, I needed to be more compassionate. Growing up in the bubble doesn't really, in the bubble I did at least, doesn't really help you with that. And I saw people from all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds, people from different cultures and lives and experiences, and that made me
People
more
who
empathetic.
and people who actually talked about these things, right? Not just because you mentioned your friend that could have like had that conversation with you, but they also were going through their own things because they were a child, and you didn't know how to bring that up because you were a child. But you found like a way to engage with people, and other people felt more comfortable doing that in college.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And the extracurriculars I got into taught me a lot. Like I was an ambassador for our Museum of Natural and Cultural History. That was so cool. I got to learn about like indigenous tribes, and I got to learn about the some really troubling parts of American history, like forced sterilization of minorities. That was a wake up call for me, and a very political wake up call at that. And
Can you
I
can you say more about that real quick? I don't know too much about that.
the sterilization part.
The forced sterilization of minorities, yeah.
Yeah, so Oregon used to be a whites only state. Like black people were not allowed to live there, and there was a history of medical professionals getting people against their will to sign documents allowing them to be sterilized, made impotent, so they couldn't have children. Sometimes they would be on drugs when signing those things, so they didn't even know what they were signing. We have a lot of that in California too. That went on well into the 60s, maybe even 70s. And learning about that it was, you know, forced eugenics, I was shocked to learn about it, and it really gave me context for a lot of the more subtle forms of racism we see today.
Yeah. When did that start in Oregon, and do you know when that started and ended in the US generally?
Forced sterilization of people started basically as soon as eugenics came into being. What is that? 1800s. That was Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, funny enough, who came up with that theory, and America loved it. And it actually later, the American forced sterilization programs inspired the Nazis, and those programs went for a very long time. You know, well into the 20th century, past the 1950s, past the 60s, into the 70s. Some places did it up until the 80s and 90s. It's, as far as I know, not a thing anymore, but maybe they've just gotten more subtle about it. I don't know.
Got you. You learn a lot about a bunch of different things. What did you actually major and or minor in too?
Psychology, political science,
Okay. Okay. Did you have a minor?
econ.
Yeah, I thought so. Um, you got such a breadth of experiences in terms of exposure from other people, but also like learning actual history of the United States that is not taught. Um, yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear about that in high school history classes. And even me, right? I had to take an extracurricular to find that out.
Yeah. So, how did your college experience inform what you did next? So, what was next for you after college?
Well, I was really impatient, even though I had a great time at college. I was really impatient to be a working adult. So I graduated in 2.5 years. Um, and funny enough, right? One of my friends I met on that Bleach roleplay forum years and years ago, this guy Mitchell, he and I kept in touch. We would talk and Skype all the time. Yeah, yeah, Skype, pre Zoom. Uh,
OG
and
Zoom.
yeah, right. It was so we would talk a lot, and he was at UCSD. And as he was finishing up college when I had already graduated, he said to me, "Hey, why don't you come visit?" So I went to visit him in San Diego for a week and had a wonderful time. So wonderful, I went back another time that same quarter for another week because my lease in Oregon wasn't up yet. So I was like, okay, well, I'll wait out this last half year on this lease and just do whatever and maybe like take some side classes like audit stuff on taxes and finance so I learned that better. And I had a lot of free time, so I went and took these trips to him. I was making pretty solid money at the time with a variety of stuff, so I was able to afford these trips. It was really cheap to fly anyway, and I could stay for free with him.
What
And
were you
I love.
doing?
Oh, well, I was getting stuff from the ambassadorship, but also I was tutoring people, tutoring a lot of international students. I was TAing some courses, and altogether that added up to quite a bit monthly.
What was your hourly rate as a tutor?
Honestly, I don't remember, but I can tell you that I probably, just from the tutoring, brought in maybe 2K a month.
Just from the tutoring.
Yeah, and my rent,
Dang.
for the record, was like 400 something, so I
Dang.
had a lot of leftover money there.
Crush. Nice.
I
That's attractive.
think so.
Okay, yeah, you were hustling in post undergrad, even though you're only there for 2.5 years. It's so fast. Um, yeah, that's wild. That's wild. Where do you think you got that resourcefulness?
I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea. It was completely different than my high school experience, where like high school, I kind of just went to school, hit the gym after, occasionally went to martial arts classes. Journalism, I guess I did work outside of school, but college was a completely different ballgame for me, where I was waking up every day to do triathlon training, and then I would go through the school day. Right as that ended, I would do whatever sport for 2 hours, like fencing or pick up basketball or swimming. And then immediately after that, I would weight train. And somehow I was like, double majoring very quickly and also somehow working. In hindsight, I have no idea how I did that.
It's really impressive. I think when you have a very driven mindset and you want to get after it, you just put your head down and do. Um, but yeah, I actually didn't know you were making that much money from just tutoring right after graduating. It's like anyone can get a standard job that pays like a regular hourly rate, but to be to graduate undergrad and be charging like different rates for a service that isn't as hour intensive. Like it's not as much an exchange of your time, so much as just like there's added value to each hour that you work. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was really cool, and it was nice to feel flush with cash as a result.
And making it to San Diego, and I think you were saying last that you really loved it there.
Yeah, I really fell in love with the vibe of it. It was everything I had liked in LA, with very little of what I disliked in LA.
So the good weather versus all the traffic, but and then a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, got you. Got you.
So yeah, so after that, I decided, you know what? I don't have a job lined up yet. I'm just gonna move in with Mitchell for a bit and live in San Diego. And I started, I got to San Diego once my lease was up, and I was living with Mitchell. He was starting med school, and I was just applying to jobs. And that was how I got into politics for the first time, like truly professionally. I started working for the San Diego County Democratic Party, doing all sorts of stuff with them, like campaigns, running canvassing operations, things like that.
And did you enjoy that?
No. Even
Even in the at the time.
at the time, I did not enjoy it. No. Politics. Oh, what were you
Go
saying?
ahead. No, go ahead.
Politics is a hustle, and it's an exhausting one. You work long hours. It's a very thankless position to be in. It's campaign after campaign after campaign, especially when it's local or congressional races. People serve 2-year terms, so one campaign ends, you're already gearing up to campaign again, and there's an election every 2 years regardless. So even if you're not working for like a congressman, you're still campaigning constantly.
Yeah, it's a endless loop almost. So I'm curious if you say you didn't enjoy it so much, why did you stay in it for so long?
I swallowed it. I just thought, you know what? This is how it has to be. I have my own political ambitions, and that means I'm going to have to do all this grunt work first. It means I'm going to have to just do a lot
Mm,
of things I don't enjoy to get there.
yeah. And do you believe that is true now that people should do the grunt work um, of pursuing something?
On some level, yes. Like, now I write, and there are a lot of parts of that are not the best. Like having to hold in ideas forever until I get to talk about them, or just how insane the editing process can be.
It's true, but you get a lot more value out of this than you did all the policy stuff.
Yeah, politics, right? There's very little to enjoy about it.
Hmm. So you moved to San Diego, got involved in campaigns. What else did you do with your time there?
Honestly, partied. Early in my time in San Diego, I had two really pivotal moments in terms of my friend groups. The first was, Mitchell was not really able to hang out except the occasional evening when we would watch movies and drink wine and like talk. And that was really beautiful. But, med school, it was busy. So I needed more friends. And so I got on Bumble BFF and I lucked out instantly. I've never heard anyone have a story as good as mine in terms of outcome for Bumble BFF, where I met this guy I mentioned earlier, Nicola. He had just moved to San Diego. It was his first month there, and he was from Switzerland, and we connected immediately. I was like, hey, do you like watching sports? Do you want to go hang out in a bar and watch some sports and drink? And he was down, so we met up at this bar called Cabo Cantina, and we shared these like giant margaritas that were only 750. One margarita was enough to get us both just smashed. and we really, really connected. I found out then he was a journalist, and not just a journalist, but a foreign correspondent there specifically to cover the Donald Trump presidency. And
Mm.
so he had a real interest in politics, and I was working in politics. So we really started to vibe, hang out more. Over time, we started meeting more people. There was this Argentinian guy, Maximo, this French guy, Pierre, this Indian guy, Jayant, and we became kind of a squad. All these different people from different places. We'd go out, we'd party, we would have these monthly dinners where one person was responsible each month for picking like a cuisine we would sample together. And that was really, really great. It was an awesome way to start my early 20s.
Cool. And then you decided to apply for grad school. And I know that law school was kind of also in the periphery for you. So, um, what did that decision look like for applying for grad school and the process for potentially law school?
Well, I applied to law school first. Didn't get in anywhere I wanted to get into at the time. I was unable to get into the like any top 14 schools, as law students call them. And so I thought, let me try again. But then I started thinking, law is good, but it might do me better to first understand government around the world better. So I decided first to apply to grad school, and I was liking living in San Diego. And as it turned out, they had a great program at UC San Diego, and I applied to that to the School of Global Policy and Strategy, and I went into public policy there. And yeah, so I applied, got in pretty quickly, and then started attending. I think what was that? The summer of 2019.
Mm-hmm. What was the experience like of going to grad school?
On the one hand, it was really great in terms of what I learned. Every day I felt like I was absorbing so much knowledge, and I had the opportunity to meet and work under these really excellent professionals like Vice Admiral Robert Thomas, who was one of the leads for Barack Obama's Seventh Fleet. And he knew a lot, and he had a great style of teaching that was very fact based. And I owe a lot of my skills today to him. And there were other professionals there who were amazing. There was another teacher. Oh God, I need to remember his name, but I haven't been in touch with him for some years. But he taught a class about terrorists and insurrections and revolutions. And I learned a lot from him about security policy. He's the reason I chose to go into a security specialization.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just great to have that. And for the first time, I felt truly challenged, and challenged from a professional and skill sense. And I found that all of my peers were excellent, sharp people with so much experience and so much talent. Like there was a girl in my class who had already worked for the United Nations, and here she was in grad school trying to better herself.
Mm.
On the other hand, I could have gotten more out of grad school, and the second year of it was pretty shitty because the pandemic happened and moved everything online.
It was actually the second half of your first year.
Yeah, it was the third quarter of the school year. We started to go remote, and then the entire second year.
Yeah. And it also took like a strain on you in other ways, as I saw.
Yeah, so many all-nighters. A lot of them I cried because the homework load was absurd, and I had to work with this outdated coding program called Stata. Not really coding so much as statistical analysis with a coding element, and that program sucks, and I stand by that today, that it is the worst, and it was just so hard to get it to work. Uh, And a lot of my personal relationships suffered because I was busy all the time, nose to the stone, as it were. And my emotions suffered because I was learning all these terrible things about the world, especially on the security front, especially on my other specialization, the social inequality front. And it it really made me cynical when I was there.
Hmm. It's one thing to, contextualize and see the changes within societies happening in real time. I mean, especially right now in this second presidency of number 47, 45, but to understand it at a policy level, in a time where the world is going through a pandemic and so many different like social uprisings, racial uprisings, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in grad school, right, Trump was still president. And so I was seeing his policies while learning about that stuff in real time and just thinking, what the fuck? And then there was social upheaval. The George Floyd thing happened when I was in grad school, and seeing the response to that and the failure of every group across every state to materialize meaningful policy to respond to that. That was a lot to take in.
Hmm. And how do you think that your experience in grad school, impacted your decision to pursue what was next for you after grad school?
It really lit a fire under my ass to do more. But at the same time, it jaded me, and it was why I decided not to be an attorney, because
Hmm.
I found the American legal system, frankly, to be a joke. It's so arbitrary. We use the common law system here, where everything is based off of these judicial precedents that really depend on individual judges way too often, pretty much every time, frankly. And if you get corrupt officials in, your law is immediately corrupted, as opposed to what they use in other countries, many other countries, the civil system, where it's based off of these regulations and statutes.
I hear that for sure.
I mean, just look at today, right? Like, it was just last year that the Supreme Court was just like, nope, you know what? The president is immune to the law, basically. Like, it's more complicated than that, but that's basically what they ruled.
Yeah. And I've seen a really great question posed since that has happened. Like the question about whether or not you're a felon on a job application is completely not necessary now. If the person that represents this people in this country does not even have to answer to that, why should the average person have to answer to that?
Well, what I think a lot of people don't understand about that is that it was never about stopping criminals from getting employment. It was a racially targeted policy
Yeah.
where they did it because the war on drugs under Nixon and onward primarily targeted black Americans. They would become felons for marijuana possession or felons for powder cocaine possession. I'm sorry, crack cocaine possession, while powder cocaine, which was being used predominantly by people who were wealthier, had a lesser sentence, and those
Yeah.
people would not be made felons. And so
Mm.
then, you get all these anti-felon laws, some of which disenfranchised those same black folks and also Latinx folks from voting. You can see it very clearly when you take a bird's eye view that it was a racially targeted thing. And now, we've got all this documentation released from the Nixon era that shows that that was very much the intent.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to argue with you on that because I'm not the policy person in this relationship. But yeah, it is. It's jarring, to learn all of these things and to know how to feel at least like very powerless to it all. Um, so, I know you said you were jaded after undergrad and you decided not to pursue the law partially because of the convolution of these systems. So, what did you do after grad school?
Well, I was on a campaign at the time, immediately after grad school. I met a guy who's a close friend now, Ricky, and he was running for state assembly, and I really wanted to support him. I joined him first as his policy guy, then later as his campaign manager, and we were trying to get a progressive to win in order to try and make a real tangible change. At the same time, I was doing all sorts of like nonprofit work. To go back a little bit, when I first got to San Diego, I joined a church called the Church of Salvation, and we had a lot of effort to getting homeless people housed. Getting not just temporary shelters but permanent housing. And I joined Feeding San Diego to do a lot of stuff to fight food insecurity. And so I was doing all this stuff, and I joined Ricky's campaign, and then we got screwed by corruption. Our opponent was this guy, Brian Mindshine. I might not be pronouncing that correctly, who was a former Republican turned Democrat, as moderate as it comes, right? As establishment as it comes. And we had a pretty solid chance of beating him. But then that year, redistricting happened before the election. And we got redistricted into a new race against a much more powerful Democratic incumbent, at which point our chance of winning became almost zero. And Ricky had to make the hard choice of giving up the campaign because it was a strain on his life, on his time with his son. And so he gave up the campaign. And after that happened, I was like, okay, politics is hopelessly corrupt. I need at least a temporary break from it, maybe a permanent one. And so that was when I decided maybe I'll try something else. And at the time, I was audiobooking a fantastic novel that my friend Tyler had recommended to me called The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And it reignited a passion for fantasy and writing that I hadn't felt in years. And I finally thought to myself, well, I've always wanted to try to write a book. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to write a book. And that was how I got started on Dragonslayer.
Your first book.
My first book.
Yeah. So you're writing this first book, and what are you doing in your life in that period?
Well, I was still in San Diego while I started writing it. Um, I don't recall if you and I were living in Hillcrest together yet when I started writing it.
We were.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if I had started when still living with Tyler or not. I'm pretty sure you're right. We were already in Hillcrest when I began. And I was, just kind of doing the same thing, right? There was you and me. I was partying with people and writing this book and working with my church and other nonprofits to make money. And while writing this book, I was also, allowing myself a little grace to pay a lot less attention to politics. Biden had become president, and I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God Biden's president. We have an adult in the room. And a lot of his policies weren't as much as I would have wanted. He did do some great stuff, but either way, regardless of what I thought, everything was stable, right? I wasn't worried about like 10 new scandals that would obliterate working class conditions every single day that I was waking up. I was able to take that breather.
Yeah. Um, and so in that time, what did you decide to do next in life?
Well, you and I decided to move to Chicago.
Because I had always wanted to live there.
Yeah, and I thought, you know what, that would be a great change of pace. And advice came to me that I had heard in one of Barack Obama's books. I audiobooked everything Obama ever wrote because I really admired the man. And advice he received from his birth father, one of the few times they were able to speak, was at every man at some point in his life should live in a city. And yeah, okay, LA and San Diego are cities, but he meant something more metropolitan, something more condensed. And you had told me about your dream of living in Chicago, and I was applying for new work at the time anyway. You were looking for a new job at the time. So I thought to myself, okay, how about I suggest that we both only look for work in Chicago and we just move there? You'll get to live out that dream. I'll get that opportunity to grow in a new city, something again more metropolitan. So I suggested it, and a few months later, there we were.
I think it took about a year until we got there from the suggestion, because we went to Lollapalooza, and then after we came back from that, you were like, "Why don't you apply for jobs there?" So then we could move there, and we didn't move until the fall of the next year.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That part, the timeline, I remember a little less well.
Yeah. And having lived in like Chicago and also having lived in LA and San Diego, like I don't think LA and San Diego are metropolitan because they're conglomerates of suburbs. They're not like a city in the same way that Chicago, New York, and San Francisco to an extent are a real city, you know, are real cities.
Yeah, they're patchwork cities where everything is like super spread out, divided up. It's hard to get places. That's why you drive everywhere in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and it's massive, you know. Like even today, just getting from where I'm at here in Torrance to where you're at over in Norwalk is like it's a in terms of distance, it's a longer drive than pretty much any drive I did in Chicago. And that's like without traffic, just 20 minutes for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 25 miles, so it's about 25-30 minutes without traffic. Um Alex gets it a little worse. Traffic from his direction to mine is usually an hour.
Yeah, that's why over in California we measure in time, not in distance.
Yeah. Yeah. So living in Chicago, writing this book, um what did you learn about yourself living in that city, and what did you learn about yourself writing that book? The first book, Clarity.
About myself living in the city, I learned a level of resourcefulness existed in me that I hadn't really thought about before. My ability to adapt to new places and make friends quickly and easily if I wanted to. You know, there was our local bar, High Low, just a few blocks down, and I would go there at night sometimes to with the intention of drinking alone and listening to music to inspire myself for the next day. But then over time, you know, I started chatting with the bartenders, getting to know them very well, and our conversations would be very interesting, and other people would start to chime in. I would start talking to those people, and I made friends that way. And I found that even in this new city, far from family members, far from the community I knew, basically a new place where I knew nobody, I could still thrive. And that was really empowering. And I also learned I had a good attention to detail. That ties into the writing because the architecture in Chicago is truly amazing. And I took a lot of inspiration from it for some of the architecture I described in Dragonslayer. And I really, I have this practice of when I see something cool, especially buildings, I stop a second and I'll describe it in prose in my notes and, you know, write that down and save it for later. And I really improved that skill while I was there.
I saw this in real time because Alex would be on a walk with me and then he'd be like, "Hold on, can we stop?" And then I'd be like, "Sure." because I knew what was gonna happen. He like takes out his phone, opens his notes app, and he's like, "I just got to describe that brick and how like this is like hitting it and like the thing." And I'm like, "Okay, that's fine."
Well, I mean, I think it's more complex than that, but yeah, you'll see it in Dragonslayer, right? Like I described the city of Maokai and how there are these triangular intersections and steel bridges. That's right out of Chicago.
Yeah, the way that the L, which is the train system, they call it the L because parts of it are elevated. Not a lot of train systems are elevated. Most of them are underground or at ground level. But yeah,
Yeah, and as for what I learned about myself in writing the book, uh, I really, like, in a way, yeah, I hadn't even in college reconnected with my Asian roots through my mom. I drew a lot on the mythology that I had grown up with from the Asian side. Dragons were exceptionally popular at that moment because Game of Thrones had ended only a couple years earlier. And people were all about that, but it was mostly these Western dragons, right? Four-legged, with like just breathing fire, and they were these forces of destruction. But Asian dragons are different. They're serpentine. They are often shapeshifters and sorcerers.
mm,
Most of them are sentient
more
and have their own
magical.
cultures. Yeah.
Unlike
And
the
so that was
Asian
really
dragons,
cool.
basic.
I'm not the biggest fan of European dragons, and I don't think I'll ever include them in my work.
Whoops.
Asian dragons are better. That's just how it is.
It's true. It's true. Um. So, after living in Chicago, what have you done since, and what do you want to do next?
Well, we moved back to Los Angeles, living separately for the moment. I know you wanted, to get some time with your parents, and I really needed the opportunity to live alone because I had never done so before in my entire life, and I needed to know for myself that I could manage a living space completely alone, and I needed to improve some of those skills. And that was really useful. I'm still doing that right now. I've got a few months left in his lease, and I've enjoyed that. And at the same time, Dragonslayer was out, so it was time to start my next book, Grimstone, which, as of recording this, comes out tomorrow.
And I'll leave the link for Dragonslayer and Grimstone in the description.
Woot.
You never say that.
Well, I felt like saying it.
Oh. Whoop,
Whoop, whoop.
whoop, whoop, boop, boop.
Boop.
Um, and so I guess what are you focusing on now?
Well, you know, Grimstone was very experimental. I was channeling a lot of political despair into it. So it's quite a depressing book. And that's what I mean by experimental. I went with something much darker in tone, uh, much darker in themes and plot and characters. And I needed a bit of a palette cleanser. So while writing Grimstone, started two secret projects that I announced back at the end of December. So they are my third and fourth books that will release both this year. One of them is Broadsheets in Hell. It's a fantasy comedy. Basically, this character Hopper
I love this one.
is.
I
It's
mean
been so fun to write.
I have an appreciation for all of them, but this one is more of my easy to read of the other ones.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will find that one more approachable than the high fantasy of Dragonslayer or the dystopian fantasy of Grimstone.
Yeah, but
But
the themes in Grimstone and Dragonslayer are different. You know, they're bigger built. You know, there's more meat to the bones.
Yeah, like Dragonslayer is very much like Naruto. It's about war and people's reaction to the brutalities you so often see in human culture and society.
And it's
And
Alex's first series.
it is my first series, whereas Grimstone is a standalone and is about more individual people trying to make it through this world that's already been destroyed by that world's equivalent of climate change.
Mm.
Whereas Broadsheets in Hell, yeah, it's satirical. This guy, Hopper, who works for Satan, he is the head of torturous conditions in hell.
Shouts.
And he has to inform Satan that in the year 2101, uh, life on Earth is more dystopian than it is in hell. And Satan is like, dude, what? So they go up to heaven to see what's going on, and they find out God is missing. So they then Hopper has to go on a journey to find God, like literally find God.
Nice.
Yeah, and then the next one is Kingmaker. Just a very it's a return to classic fantasy. You know, it's ancient Roman inspired culture, and it's a lower level magic system than any of the prior three, where all magic is item based. Characters don't tend to have their own inherent magic, and so that's a lot more character driven than I think the first few books were, and it's a lot more about these individual journeys.
Mm. Good stuff. All forthcoming.
All forthcoming, along with a few other projects. This year I'm really trying to expand. Get audiobooks out, do some other creative stuff that I actually can't describe on this podcast because I'm under an NDA. But yeah, got a lot of exciting stuff coming.
Very cool. Um, I have one final question for you, which is I want you to leave a message for your younger self. How old is that younger self, and what is the message?
I guess I would want to. Yeah, I think I would want to reassure my 15-year-old self who felt very insecure and alienated. And I would want to tell him A, you don't have to try so hard to be cool, just be yourself. And B, uh, it is more than okay to embrace your imagination.
Hmm. I love that. Is there any way that you want listeners to reach you? I'll leave the links for your books, obviously, but is there any other way you want to be reached or followed for your work?
Oh, yeah. To follow my social media, at least, you can follow me on my Instagram handle, World Hopper Books. Um, I would plug my website, worldhopperbooks.com, but I have to admit that's going to go down this year because my work is getting incorporated under a new label. The one of the things I've done this year is I've started a co-op, a work co-op with some people. It's like a more cooperative form of a corporation, I guess. And we're opening a publishing house because we have multiple people in there who would like to publish work. And I have had a lot of people outside that company show me interest in having their work published through us. So yeah, I have to rebrand. But for now, you can reach me on Instagram, World Hopper Books. No special characters. It's as it's spelled as it sounds. And if anyone wants to message me there, that's cool. I can also be reached by email, worldhopperbooks@gmail.com.
Okay. I will make note of both of those into this description. Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast, Babi. I've really enjoyed this conversation and deep dive into your life, and wanted to give you the space to share about your life and, you know, share your work and all that you're working on now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Okay, cool. Alrighty, I'll see you around. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creating Your Conditions, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, forged from, and we have yet to face. You can follow us on Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube at Creating Your Conditions, which you can also find in the description of this episode. Again, my name is Vin. It's been a pleasure being your host. Keep creating, and I'll catch you in the next episode.